is it developing democratic outcomes? Democracy's normative end must be to deliver satisfaction to a vast majority of the people over long duration, right? Otherwise, what are we in it for? What good is a set of procedures if it results in undemocratic outcomes? What's good is an election if elections keep producing incompetent leaders? What's good about judicial independence if it protects only the rich? What's so great about freedom of the press or freedom of speech if it leads to division and dysfunction in societies?
大家好，今天这期视频要聊的是一个西方越来越不愿面对的问题：民主真的还像过去那样香吗？过去几十年，西方一直把自由民主视为最优越的制度，认为选举、自由和完善的政治程序就能带来更好的社会。但如今，全球民主却陷入持续倒退，甚至连美国自己都开始承认，民主正面临越来越严重的危机。到底是什么出了问题？难道民主本身正在失灵？5年前，在这场关于民主未来的访谈中，中国企业家、学者李世默就抛出了一个极具争议的问题：会不会不是民主失败了，而是西方的自由主义正在让民主失灵？李世默认为，评价一个制度不能只看选举和政治程序，更应该看最终结果：老百姓是否过得更好，社会是否更加稳定，年轻人是否对未来充满希望。如果一套制度程序看起来无比漂亮，但最终却换来社会撕裂，治理失效和民众越来越失望，那么这样的民主究竟还有多少意义？更耐人寻味的是，5年前的这些质疑，如今再回头看，似乎正在变得越来越现实。西方社会的政治撕裂和治理困境不断加剧，而中国却在科技、产业、基础设施等领域持续发展，西方不可一世的神话真的要破灭了。接下来就让我们走进这场访谈。
Today I wanted to focus more about democracy, and we'll talk about China a little bit too. We're having this discussion it seems to me, at a precarious time for democracy. There are a lot of rumors swirling around the globe that democracy is in trouble. Okay, Kishore just summarized some of the rumors. Kishore, I hope it's fake news that democracy is in trouble. Okay, but the coverage has been relentless, and data is mounting. Freedom House, in their most recent report this year, said global decline in democracy has accelerated. And in addition, it says US democracy has declined significantly. Okay. VDAM, this outfit in Sweden, also says their surveys show a global decline in democracy. And interestingly, it said US-aligned nations decline the most for some reason. Okay. Larry Diamond, who is one of the most senior democracy scholars in the world, have been complaining about what he called democratic recession for many years, and recently has just upgraded that to a crisis level. Okay. Now, none other than President Biden, who this year said many things. He said that implied that the president of China is betting democracy can't keep up with autocracy, and they must prove China wrong, he said. In his address to the first joint session of Congress, he said that this point in history is about whether or not democracy can function in the 21st century. He said, can we act in the framework needed to compete with autocracy? I must say there's almost like a whiff of despair in such proclamations. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of China when I was growing up, right after the Cultural Revolution. We were in deep trouble, and our leaders and our elites were saying, oh my God, time is running out, we got to prove socialism works. It's a precarious moment, and it's a confusing moment. Tunisia, this one country, all right, that's where the Arab Spring began, as we know, as the Jasmine Revolution, okay? So before, it was characterized as a dictatorship, of course. So according to the Freedom House, look at that, 2000, before the Arab Spring, not democratic, not free, red, bad, okay? And then, of course, Jasmine Revolution, the scores have improved to partly free. Then it got even better, okay? all green light going on, looking really good for Tunisia, right? According to the Freedom House, democracy is triumphing. Yet, look at that. The people in Tunisia are miserable. They hate it. As the Freedom House numbers show improvements, significant improvements, the people of Tunisia are suffering. Their views are opposite. What is going on here, right? Now, this is from Pew Research, and they stopped collecting data at 2016. I don't know why. Maybe it's just too embarrassing. But my guess is after 2016, according to what I read in news reports, it's gotten even much worse. So I drew 2 red lines to show my guesses, okay? It's been going down precipitously, and now we have a new regime. I'm not predicting whether this new guy is going to succeed or fail, okay? I'm just saying there's a big change. And of course, as you know, Tunisia was where Arab Spring began and was billed as the shining example of the Arab Spring, and then later the only success story of the Arab Spring. Why are all the data and the facts are so confusing? And we'll come back to the Summit of Democracies that's about to take place next week. And I just ran the invite list. China is not on the invite list, but 110 countries were invited. A very diverse group of countries, very different in historical developments, culture, economic, and what have you. These 111 countries, how they did with one of the most pressing crises of our times, the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, these 111 countries accounted for 4.4 billion population, which is 56% of the world's population. They had 4.2 million fatalities, which is 83% of the world's total. Handled it very badly, all right? Very unfortunate. And of the 3 most prominent players in this group, the US had 750,000 deaths, 750,000. Brazil, 610, and India, 470,000. And by the way, the US and India each respectively claim that one is the oldest democracy in the world and one is the largest democracy in the world. So what is wrong? What is going on with democracy? I like to, again, I'm not an expert, I'm not Larry Diamond, but I wanted to, from a businessman's perspective, venture a diagnosis. Okay, so I went and studied the methodologies that are being used by Freedom House and VDAM and those institutions when they evaluate democracies. And I found something very interesting. They only measure a particular set of institutional procedures. Okay, and these procedures strikes me as very specific to liberal politics and liberal societies. Okay, certain kind of elections, freedom of press, just liberal values. Okay, so it seems to me that the disconnect is maybe they're measuring liberalism, not democracy. So they're measuring one kind of democracy called liberal democracy, and at that, they're only measuring the liberal part. Okay, so we all know that democracy long preceded liberalism by at least a couple of thousand years. The democracy in ancient Greece was decidedly not liberal. And many scholars argue China's Confucian values had a lot of democratic elements. But of course, China is not liberal. Liberalism only was born at the onset of the modern era. During the Enlightenment, a lot of great thinkers like Locke, Montesquieu, Mill, they proposed revolutionary ideas about how to govern human societies. And they centered around a set of values that we now call liberalism. The individual being the center of the universe, autonomous, private property was virtually sacred, a procedural take on rule of law, and these values became political institutions that we call liberal institutions. So my hypothesis today, please, there's no offense intended, don't be offended, okay? I'm throwing out a hypothesis, I could be wrong. My hypothesis is Now, is it possible? Is it possible? The problem today is liberal regimes are failing democracy. Is it possible liberal regimes are failing democracy, and that's what's ailing democracy? Because, like as liberal societies led democratic progress in the world for some time. Okay, and we got to credit liberal societies for that, but now liberalism is failing democracy. So I want to venture a solution too. We can't just measure procedures. Okay, if you look at these VDAM and Freedom House, they only measure procedures. The one thing they never measure is outcome or result. Okay, I mean, I'm a businessman. No one has ever come to me and pitched me a stock and say, Eric, you got to buy this stock because this company, has been losing money for 20 years. The technology sucks. Their people are leaving in droves. They have no customer. But man, the company's really governed with great procedures. Their board meetings are conducted beautifully. Buy the stock. No, that doesn't happen. Okay, so I think we ought to, consider measuring outcomes. Is the system delivering democratic outcomes? I don't care what the procedure is, whether it's liberal procedures or Islamic procedures, Chinese procedures, is it developing democratic outcomes? Democracy's normative end must be to deliver satisfaction to a vast majority of the people over long duration, right? Otherwise, what are we in it for? What good is a set of procedures if it results in undemocratic outcomes? What's good is an election if elections keep producing incompetent leaders? What's good about judicial independence if it protects only the rich? What's so great about freedom of the press or freedom of speech if it leads to division and dysfunction in societies? So I think we ought to measure, we should venture, we should explore, we should have at least a dialogue, a discourse around the world about how to measure democracy by outcomes. Are the people satisfied with how they're governed? Are they optimistic about the future? Is your society cohesive? Are you better off than before? When I was studying in the United States, it was President Reagan's second term. Are you better off than 4 years ago? Are you better off? Is your country investing enough for future generations? Or are they just spending future generations' money? Okay, all these things, I just read there's a Chinese scholar at Beida, I forget his name, who's suggesting that there should be a social mobility index. Now, that sounds right to me. Is your society socially mobile? That should count as whether your system's generating democratic outcome. So I think I'd like to use this opportunity to suggest a new discourse around the world. I think there was a great American leader who said, let's make the world safe for democracy. I think now we need to make democracy better for the world. And my suggestion is we need to develop new measurements. And new measurements are good, especially for developing countries, because a lot of developing countries in the past few decades have been shackled by liberal doctrines and liberal institutions that they're unable to develop their democratic potential. So they could explore new ways. And I might say that new measurements will be good for liberal societies. Liberal regimes are failing because I think nobody's challenged them, because they never have to be measured by outcome. Imagine if you go to a school and you take tests, you never get grades. A lot of them in America these days. You're not going to do well. Okay, I mean, it's basic economic theory that monopolies, when a monopoly is forced to compete, they don't do well. They can't compete. Okay, and liberal societies have pretty much monopolized the interpretation of democracy, that they take their democratic credentials for granted. Okay, and that's dangerous for liberal society. I think liberal democracy ought to have a chance of succeeding. And I think there should be many forms of democracies, and they can compete, and the competition is better. For China, I think China ought to actively participate in a new discourse on democracy. I mean, it's disappointing that China has been pretty much absent in the global dialogue and discourse on democracy. I mean, China doesn't talk about this. They don't send people out to explore new ideas about democracy. So China needs to actively participate instead of ceding the ground. And they need to acknowledge their own successes and failures, and to develop new measurements. For Mr. Biden, I want to, when he holds his big party with 110 countries, I want to make a suggestion for his keynote speech. Not that he'll take any advice from me, but I think he should say that, let's get our act together and set some goals and be measured by them, by those goals, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, okay? And liberal democracy is failing now, is in trouble, but liberal democracy succeeded before, especially in the second half of the 20th century. Liberal democracy succeeded beautifully, delivered amazing, unprecedented improvements in their people's lives, to the point that so many countries, including China, after the Cold War, thought to emulate a lot of the West's political practices, like market economics, right? I might say, Mr. Biden should say, not all liberal democracies are failing. You know, if we can't bring ourselves to say that maybe China is doing something right, we can learn, it loses too much face. You know, but among the liberal democracies, there are those who are succeeding. Sweden, Norway, Finland, New Zealand, their numbers are pretty good. So maybe for a start, the big democracies could learn, liberal democracies could learn, liberal societies could learn something from these smaller players. If they don't act now, they are in danger that liberal societies, the word liberal, will no longer deserve to be followed by the word democracy. Thank you.
回顾这场访谈，李世默真正抛出的其实并不是一句简单的西方民主不行，中国制度更好，而是一个直到今天依然值得追问的问题：一个制度究竟应该看它的程序，还是看它最终给老百姓带来了什么？如果选举一次又一次，却换不来更好的治理；如果政治程序越来越复杂，社会却越来越撕裂；如果所谓的自由民主没有让普通人对未来更有信心，那么我们是不是也应该重新思考，民主的真正目的到底是什么？李世默在访谈中提出，不能只盯着选举、媒体、自由、司法独立这些程序，更应该关注人民是否满意，生活是否改善，社会是否具有凝聚力，年轻人有没有向上流动的机会。而这恰恰也是中国发展道路最值得观察的地方。中国没有照搬西方制度，而是更加重视长期规划、经济发展、基础设施建设、科技进步和社会稳定。至少从这场访谈所讨论的逻辑来看，如果最终结果是让一个拥有10几亿人口的国家持续发展，让无数普通人的生活发生巨大变化，那么这种发展模式就不应该因为不符合西方标准而被简单否定。更重要的是，一个国家的发展从来不是靠几句漂亮口号就能完成的，真正的较量最终还是要落到经济实力、科技创新、产业体系以及普通人的生活上。谁能持续解决问题，谁能不断创造机会，谁就更有资格证明自己的道路。而且真正值得我们关注的并不是某一种制度是否拥有绝对正确的答案，而是一个国家能不能不断发现问题、解决问题，并且根据自身国情找到适合自己的发展路径。如果一条道路能够经得起时间检验，那么它就值得被认真观察，而不是被简单贴上标签。反过来看美国，过去最喜欢告诉全世界什么才叫民主，如今却不得不面对自身越来越严重的政治撕裂、社会分化和治理困境。更讽刺的是，西方长期拿自己制定的标准给别人打分，却很少认真追问，如果你真的那么成功，为什么自己的问题却越来越多？所以今天我们再看5年前李世默的这番话，最值得讨论的或许不是中国是不是比美国好这么简单，而是评价一个国家到底应该看他喊出了多少漂亮口号，还是看普通人的日子究竟有没有越来越好。那么问题来了，如果一个国家能够让经济持续发展，科技不断突破，基础设施不断完善，让越来越多的人拥有更好的生活，这算不算一种成功？如果算，那么西方为什么始终不愿承认不同道路也可以走向成功？你认为民主最重要的是程序正确，还是结果让人民满意？ 中国的发展道路究竟有没有给西方上了一课？欢迎把你的观点留在评论区。